are going through the prophecies of the New Testament. And we've been doing this for a while. I'm not really the full-time Sunday school teacher, but I fill in between. So I'm kind of an in-betweener kind of guy, and I've been in between now for a couple of months. But anyway, we are in Revelation chapter 12, and the last verse that we did was verse 6. So I want to kind of review a little bit from verse 6 and work our way down through there. And so with that, let's see, Brother Emmanuel, can you read Revelation chapter 12, verse 6 for me, sir? All right, very quickly, prophetically speaking, we define the woman as being who? Israel, okay. And why is she fleeing into the wilderness? All right, because the devil, the dragon, Satan, that old serpent, is persecuting her. And she goes to a place prepared of God. We talked a little bit about that, some of the theories that are out there being Masada or Petra, because they're very easily defended from land forces. But nowadays we don't do a lot of fighting with land forces first. We usually bomb people into oblivion and then go in. And so neither Petra nor Masada will be very effective in that. So the bottom line is we don't really know where this place is. It may be as simple as the Jews, just kind of spread out throughout the world, scattered throughout the world again. It may be that simple, but we don't know. We're not there. All we do know is that she is fed there for 1,260 days. And that kind of catches us up to where we were at. I want to read verse 14 also. So we read verse 6, but we need to read verse 14. It's kind of it mentions the same time period, and so I want to kind of focus in on that a little bit. So, Brother Aaron, can you read that? Revelation 12 and verse 14.
And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time, and times, and half a time, from the face of the serpent.
All right, so the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, and I think we talked a little bit about that last week, where there's a lot of people today, if you want to sell books, write a book about prophecy. That's what they say. And there's probably a lot of truth to that, because everybody wants to know what's happening in the future. And so you can buy some of these books, and typically what do they tell you? They'll tell you that the great eagle is America. Well, I don't know if it is or not. The great eagle might also, the great eagle has been the symbol for a lot of places and a lot of people. All we know is it says great eagle. Now I will say that America stands by Israel. Even the liberals, who really didn't like Israel so much, felt the pressure of the public and still kind of stood by Israel even in their time periods. But so we've always been kind of linked together in that we've always backed Israel in that sense, to the point where there was a time not too long ago where an American person who was working for the American government sold secrets to Israel, and he got spanked, but nothing happened to our relationship with Israel because we love them anyway. So the woman flees into the wilderness, and she is persecuted by Satan, who is called the dragon, by the Antichrist. Okay, so remember when we say Satan is Satan a real person?
Yes.
Yeah, he's a real person. He's not like a person like we think of this person or that person, but he is a real person. He's not just an evil influence or a cloud of badness floating in the world. He is a real being created by God, and he hates God, and he hates God's plan, and desires to destroy Israel. And so I don't think we read this last week, but turn to Zechariah chapter 13, verses 8 and 9. And let's see, let's get Samuel to read that when he gets there. Zechariah 13 verses 8 and 9.
Zechariah 13.
Yes, sir. Verses 8 and 9.
And it shall come to pass that in all the land, saith the Lord, 2 parts therein shall be cut up and die, but the third shall be left therein. And I will bring the third part out of the fire, and will refine them as silver is refined, and will try them as gold is tried, and shall call on my name, and I will hear them. I will say, this is my people, and they shall say, the Lord is my God.
All right, so this is referring to Israel, who apparently 2/3 are cut off and die, but 1/3 make it through. But that third is refined as silver is refined, and tried or proven as gold is tried. And at the end of all of that trial, and at the end of all of that, they come out the other end, and they shall call on my name, and I will hear them. I will say, it is my people, and they shall say, the Lord is my God. Now, in some way not disclosed here in Revelation 12, God protects Israel during this time and times in the dividing of time, or 1260 days. God protects them in a place that's described as the wilderness. Now, Matthew 24, I think we read verses 15 through 21. We won't read this again, but I think we read it last week, where Jesus actually speaks of this. He speaks of something called the abomination of desolation, and he mentions that it was spoken of by Daniel the prophet. And Daniel actually speaks of it about 4 times in the book of Daniel. And he said, when you see that happen, run, head for the hills. Don't take the time to grab your toothbrush, just get out of Dodge. And so last week I said that the abomination of desolation, we looked at the verses concerning that from the book of Daniel. And does anybody remember? I said it was like a dual prophecy. There was a local fulfillment and then a future fulfillment. Does anybody remember that? Does anybody care? Was anybody here besides me? All right. So the local fulfillment was who? Does anybody remember? You should remember this. You're going to hear about this many times over in your Christian life if the rapture doesn't happen soon. It was a man named Antiochus Epiphanes, and he desecrated the temple, and he offered a pig on the sacred altar, and it caused an uprising. The uprising was the Maccabean family. They said, that's it, enough is enough. And there was a period called the Maccabean Revolt, which is not written about in the scriptures. It happens in that 400 silent years between Malachi and Matthew. And so you can kind of read about that in history a little bit. And so the revolt was initially effective, but after a while, of course, the Romans crushed it and moved on in. But there is a future fulfillment referring to the Antichrist himself. And 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 verse 4 mentions this as well. And so can you read that for us, or you just?
2 Thessalonians.
Yeah, I don't want to. I mean, I see you crushing your fingers there, so work them puppies out.
What chapter?
Chapter 2 and verse 4, referring to the Antichrist.
Okay. To oppose it and exalt it himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God.
All right, so this is, Jesus referred to it as the abomination of desolation. He spoke of it in future tense, all right? And he said it was coming, and the Antichrist will do this. He will sit himself in the temple, and he will proclaim himself to be God. And this happens at the midpoint. Remember, we were looking last week at Daniel 9:27. We won't go back there, but he makes a covenant with many for 1 week, and then in the midst of the week, he causes the sacrifice and oblation to cease. And for the abomination which maketh desolate, it says, and so that's at the middle of the week. And so Daniel gives us a length in his prophecy, and Daniel likes to use the phrase a time and times and the dividing a time, or time and times and half a time. But if you look in Revelation chapter 11, verse 2, and we talked about Revelation chapter 11, I guess 3 or 4 weeks ago, but in verse 2, the period of 42 months is given. 42 months is how long? 3.5 years. Okay, and then Revelation 12:6, what's the time period there?
1260 days.
Okay, 1260 days. And how long is that? 3.5 years. And then Daniel 7:25 and also Revelation 12:14 mentions a time and times and a half a time, which again is 3.5 years. This 3.5 years is the last 3.5 years of the tribulation period. And when this happens, Jesus said that the Jewish people should flee into the mountains. Matthew 24:16. And Brother Story, would you read that for us? He's going to be preaching this afternoon, so make sure you're here. It's good. It's always good, right? Matthew 24:16.
Matthew 24:16, then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains.
All right, so that's the time that Jesus is referring to. Now, some people believe that all of this is a reference to the persecution that came at the hands of the Roman Empire in the last half of the 1st century. But the problem with that is that the Roman persecution, it was bad, and I'm not trying to downplay it. Anytime people die, it's bad. But the Roman persecution was not even close to the level of destruction that was brought upon the Jews by the Babylonian Empire. I remind you, the Babylonians ripped them out of their lands, killed untold, who knows how many, hundreds of thousands, and sought to assimilate them and destroy them as a people completely. That's what the Babylonians were doing. And it was much worse than what the Romans did. Jesus said that the time that was coming would be so great, Matthew 24 and verse 21, Jesus referred to it as great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time. So Jesus speaking in 30 AD or 31 AD, whatever, pick a year, I don't care. Anyway, in 30 AD, Jesus said, this is going to be worse than what we have ever seen before. In other words, it was even worse than what Babylon did. Worse than what the Medo-Persians did. Worse than what the Greeks did. It's going to be worse than that. It's going to be worse than Antiochus Epiphanes. It's going to be worse than all of that. It is coming. And then he says this. He says, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. So this is a standalone event that is worse than anything Israel has ever seen. So the Romans don't qualify because the Babylonians were worse than the Romans. And Babylon doesn't qualify because Jesus said, no, it's going to be worse than that. So it's something coming. Something even worse. And I point this out because this is going to be a time of great trouble for the Jews. But there will be those who will be delivered from it. Remember the passage in Zechariah said 1/3 would come through. Let's go back to Daniel chapter 12, verse 1 now. And Sammy, can you read that, Daniel 12:1?
Daniel 12:1. And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book.
Now there's a key here in Daniel 12:1, and I don't want to lose sight of this. 1/3 of the Jews make it through, but I also want you to notice that what we find in Daniel is it says that thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. So these are not just Jews. They're not just saved because they happen to be a part of the 1/3 that lived. No, these are going to be believing Jews. So that tells us something about God's preservation to go along with it. Now, as we're moving through Revelation chapter 12, we're looking at 7 wonders. And we've just finished the previous wonder, and that previous wonder was, let me just run down through them for you. The first one was the woman, and that's in verses 1 and 2. Then you have the dragon in verses 3 and 4. Then you've got the man-child in verses 5 and 6. And so now we come down to the war in heaven, which is verses 7 through 17. And you're saying, but we just talked about some of these verses already. Well, we had to in order to understand the earlier prophecies. But now we're going to look at this war in heaven. In Revelation chapter 12, verses 7 through 17. And I'll go ahead and read this because it's very long and somebody will beat me up if I ask them to read, so I'll read it. But it says this, Revelation chapter 12, "And there was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. And the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not. Neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, Now is come salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto the death. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. And when the dragon saw that he was cast into the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place where she is nourished for a time and times, and half a time from the face of the serpent. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened up her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which kept commandments of God, and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So when we speak of these wonders, don't think of them as 7 individual visions. Now there are a couple that are, but you'll notice that here in Revelation chapter 12, you have the woman, and you have the man-child, and you have the dragon, and you have this war in heaven with Michael the archangel there. And these are intertwined. These 4 are very much intertwined. So keep that in mind. Remember that this is a parenthesis in the book of Revelation, and what God is doing is explaining some things. And it's not chronological, because the nation of Israel goes all the way back to who was the first Jew? Adam was the first Jew?
Abraham?
Abraham? Okay, why is Abraham the first Jew?
He's the first one to be circumcised.
Okay, all right, first one circumcised. You find the 12 tribes after Jacob, and Jacob was given the name Israel, so some people mark it there. The point is, it happened a long, long time ago, okay? The vision of the woman goes all the way back to the dreams of Joseph, so I suppose you could go all the way back there if you wanted to start talking about how far back it goes. But we get a parenthesis that explains Israel from the beginning to the end. We get the story of the man-child, where we're given the pre-incarnation and the incarnation and the crucifixion and the ascension, and we're given that concerning the man-child. So from the beginning to the end, we're given the dragon from who he is, and from the beginning to the end. And so we've got this war in heaven, and this is a specific time reference for the war. It's not a continual war. So the first thing I want to note before we get into the main prophetic points of the passage is that there's already a war going on, isn't there? Every day, don't you fight against the world, the flesh, and the devil? Every day. There's a war for the hearts and the minds of every man, woman, and child going on today. But we need to be careful not to identify this passage with something that is happening now or that happened in the past. Verse 10 speaks of those who are referred to as brethren. And therefore what we're reading cannot be confused with the fall of Satan after which he went to the garden to tempt Adam and Eve. Some people see that and they say, well, that was the fall of Satan there. It's not. We'll cover that in just a moment. We speak of the Christian life as being a battleground, right? That's what it is. It's a battleground because our daily fight against, a spiritual warfare. And the type of war which we are engaged in is not a physical war. The Bible says we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against what? Principalities and powers, and right? Okay? Ephesians 6:12. Who wants to read that? I need a volunteer. Go ahead.
against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places.
All right, so this is a battle that we are engaged in. And the last time I checked, Michael never came to fight the battle of my flesh, nor did he fight any other battles. This is something significantly different. What's being described here in Revelation 12 transcends the normal day-to-day spiritual warfare that we're engaged in. This section describes a literal war between angelic beings, the dragon, which is Satan, and Michael. Who's Michael? Who's this guy? We talked about him before. Does anybody remember? He's the archangel, right. The Jews say that there were 7 archangels. The Bible doesn't say that. That's just their Jewish tradition or whatever. Take it for what it's worth. The only one that's named as an archangel in the Bible is Michael, all right? And this is a war in heaven. What does that mean, right? Heaven, that's a big word. Is that the atmosphere with the clouds? Or is it the galaxy among the planets? The universe? The place of God's abode? It just says heaven. Now there are, if you want to know more, you read that and you go, which heaven is that? So naturally, you grab yourself a Strong's Concordance or some sort of, Bible study help, and you begin looking at Greek and Hebrew words. Well, there are basically 7 words in the Bible that are translated heaven. And before we get into which word we find in Revelation 12, I want to give you these very quick and very on the surface. We're not going to do an in-depth study of each word. That would take us way too long. It's beyond the scope of our study. But just so that you can kind of grasp what we're looking at here. In the Old Testament, there are 5 different words. The first 3 words are extremely rare, and they're only translated as heaven 1 time in the Old Testament. The first one is the word Galgal, and it's only in Psalm 77:18. And 77:18 it says, "The voice of thy thunder was in heaven." And it describes, the word itself describes something that is rolling along, which is why it's also translated in other places as wheel, interestingly enough. Describes the rolling skies, and you could think of, the skies rolling along if you want. Just think of the sun, the moon, and the stars as they move across the sky. So that's the concept behind the word. But that's a Hebrew word. That's not here in Revelation 12. Okay. Then you have another word, Ba'araboth, or Ba'araboth, and that's found in Psalm 68:4, where it says, "Extol him that rideth upon," on top of, "the heavens." This one was interesting. When I came across this one, I was looking at it. I studied this word for about a week and a half, trying to figure out, what's going on here, because it's an interesting word. It's interesting for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's the form of another word, araba. And if you have one of those neat little electronic Greek and Hebrew pop-ups where you click on the number and something pops up to tell you what the word is, it's going to tell you that the word is araba. It's not. If you read Hebrew, you can actually look at the word in the Hebrew text, and the word is ba'araboth, which is a form of araba. So that's why they do that. It's usually translated as the plains or the desert. That's how it's translated in almost every case. In Psalm 68, there's the prefix applied, which is ba'araboth, and it changes the word, which means in every other passage where this form is, by the way, ba'araboth is found in more than one place, and every place where it's found otherwise in the King James is translated in the plains. Why did the translators choose to render it upon the heavens in Psalm 68? I don't know, but they did. It's the only place where it's like that. I am not smart enough to figure out why they made the choice. I do know that 54 translators who can speak more than 10 languages probably know more about Hebrew than I do, so I'm just going to trust their word on that. But that's how it's translated, okay? There's another Hebrew word, which is the word Reve. It's a very rare word. It's found only in Isaiah 5, verse 30, and it's used to indicate the visible skies, okay? That one's pretty simple. One of the more common words is the word shachak. That's found 21 times in the Old Testament. It's usually translated as clouds or skies, and so what's it describing? It's describing the atmosphere where the clouds are, where the jets fly, okay? That's the word, that's what it's describing. The final Hebrew word is the word shamay or shamayim when it's in the plural. It's found 420 times. So that's the big Old Testament Hebrew word that's translated heaven. 420 times in the Old Testament. And it just literally means the heights. So in other words, up there. It could be the clouds and the atmosphere. It could be, the galaxy where we have the sun, the moon, and the planets. It could even be beyond that. It's just the heights. And it's used in a full variety of different ways. The heights. It kind of denotes the highest point from man's perspective. So think of, the sun at noonday, at its highest point. The heights, okay, the highest point. The problem is, scientifically, there really isn't a highest point in the sky. There really isn't. But that kind of gives you the idea. The highest point in the sky is, I don't know. We haven't found the end of the universe yet. Okay? So if the universe is this big, we might be over here. You see what I'm saying? We can see this much and we think this is the highest point when it might actually be the other way. If everybody understands what I'm saying. All right? We don't know because we haven't seen the end yet. However, if we ever do see the end, and I don't know that we ever will, but if we ever do see the end, understand this, that God is even beyond that. Okay? He is not confined in creation. He is above creation. Now, it is true that he is omnipresent, but where was God from? Where was God from? He wasn't from anywhere because he hadn't made anywhere to be from yet, right? So it's, kind of a moot point to talk about where God was from. He's just beyond all of that. All right. That's all the Hebrew words. Any questions on the Hebrew words before we move on? Because the Greek words are even more interesting.
Will there be a test on that?
No, there won't be a test. Here's a good thing. You can go out on the internet and find this in you could go to our YouTube channel and go to the Sunday School playlist, and you can find this there. Anyway, so if you missed it and you want to go back and hear it again, you can do that, all right? There are a couple of Greek words to consider, and that's important because Revelation is written in Greek, okay? First we have the word mesuranima, and it's found 6 times in the New Testament, and it denotes the highest point in the visible sky, so that's kind of, we've covered that concept before. Keep in mind, we're talking about words that are used to describe what is seen from man's perspective, not God's perspective. Then we have a word that is the word Uranos, or Uranos, and it's found over 400 times in the New Testament, and the meaning is very wide. It could be the sky with the stars, what we would call we would call it outer space, going to outer space, or aliens from outer space. And I heard a really cool theory the other I think it was last week I heard this. This is how stupid people can get when they forget that there is a God. Okay? There are some scientists out there that actually believe that the microbes that were on Mars, at one point they were living microbes on Mars, and a big meteor or something, or maybe a comet or something, hit Mars and knocked those microbes all the way down to Earth. And there was nothing here at that time, but those microbes landed on Earth, and because we have water and oxygen and all that, the microbes turned into us. So if you want to know what an alien looks like, look in the mirror. You're it. You've been planted here from Mars. So if you find a Martian, he's going to look like us, I guess, right? Ridiculous. All right? God created man. He put us in a garden. Genesis chapters 1 and 2. Believe it or don't believe it. That doesn't change the fact that it's true. Okay? So anyway, Uranus could be the sky with the stars. And Revelation 6 verse 13 uses this word. It says, and the stars of heaven fell into the earth. The same Greek word could also describe the atmosphere where the clouds are. In Matthew 24 verse 30 it says, then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Or it could be the place of God's throne. Hebrews 4:2 uses the same word, and it says, "And immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was set in heaven, and one sat upon the throne." So if you were going to try to make a Greek word equal to a Hebrew word, Shemayim would be equal to Uranus, okay? Which is the word we're looking at now. They're very near equivalents. And so now you're asking, well, what's the word here? Well, sadly, it's the word Uranus. So we don't really get much specific. So if we wanted to know exactly where this war happens, we can only do that in two ways. Number one, we're going to look at some things in the passage that will maybe help us a little bit. But secondly, up. That's about it. All right? That's about all we get. All right? Go to 2 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 2. Like I said, it's a very wide word, and it doesn't really give us any clues as to which heaven John had in mind. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 2, and let's see, who can read that? Let's see, Brother Young, can you read that for me?
I knew a man in Christ of God for 14 years ago. Where in the body I cannot tell, or whether out of the body I cannot tell. I know it is such on one cut off the third heaven.
Paul says the third heaven. He's talking about the heaven where God's throne is. The second heaven would be, outer space. And the first heaven would be, the atmosphere with the clouds and so forth. So, using internal clues in Revelation 12 is our only recourse, other than just saying it is up. There's another interesting parallel between Revelation 12 verses 7 through 10 and Daniel chapter 12 verses 1, 2, and 3. And let's see, Brother Aaron, can you read that for me? Daniel 12 verses 1, 2, and 3.
And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever.
Now, Daniel 12 verses 1 through 3 is referring to the time of tribulation being removed. The last two verses, you kind of pick up on that. But the similarity is there's Michael again. And what's he doing? Michael is standing up, the great prince which stands for the children of thy people, referring to Israel. And so the context of Daniel's prophecy actually begins in chapter 10. And we're given a very detailed description of what's going to happen, what's going to befall the Jewish people in the end times. And that kind of goes on for about 3 chapters. And so Daniel describes a point in time where Michael stands up for Israel. And that's what we read in Revelation chapter 12. The dragon is persecuting the woman, which is Israel. So you can kind of see the similarities there. For Israel, the last 3.5 years is going to be a time of trouble worse than they've ever seen before. That's Daniel 12:1. And that's going to be followed by a resurrection, which, when I read that, I get excited. I don't know about you. When I start thinking about the Lord's return and that sort of thing, it can get very exciting. So Daniel, speaking of a time that's going to be worse than Israel's ever seen before. We've covered that before. And now we have this midpoint of the tribulation period, and it all lines up very well. And so we'll come back next week and kind of review a little bit from there to kind of get us going again. Well, I think we'll skip the words and get us going again and just kind of pick up from there. Has anybody got any questions or comments? We're going to close just a few minutes early because I don't want to get too far down into this section. It's kind of long. Right. Anyone? No questions? No comments? So everybody's good on Bible prophecy now so that you can debate Tim LaHaye? Yeah. No? Maybe not? All right. With that then, let's see. Cody, would you close us in prayer?
Sure.
By the way, if you've not met Cody, this is his first Sunday morning with us. He was with us Friday night. He's quite an exciting guy. He's got a lot of energy. I love that. All right? So close us in prayer.
Dear Lord, I want to thank you for this day. Thank you for allowing this